A very good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's event on Ireland and the European Climate Pact. My name is Andy Klom, and I'm the acting head of the Commission's representation in Ireland. And I'm delighted that there's such a big interest today for our event. Over 300 people have signed up from all walks of life, and you're most welcome to join us during the course of our discussions. Now, the topic today is linked to the European Green Deal, which is a top priority of the European Commission. The European Climate Pact is an important element of this European Green Deal, and it's an EU-wide initiative inviting people, communities, and organizations to participate in climate action and build a greener Europe. The aim of today's meeting is for participants to get a better understanding of the Climate Pact and the climate challenges facing Europe. We also want to hear your views, and I hope that some of you will consider even becoming an EU Climate Pact ambassador. Now, some practicalities. We have up to around about 11:45. If you would like to ask a question, then please send an email to events@europeanmovement.ie. I'll repeat that again, events@europeanmovement.ie. And I think it's being shown on the screen as well. But you can also post questions and comments on social media by using the hashtags #EU Climate Pact and #EU Green Deal. Now, we have a great panel of presenters today to lead our discussion, beginning with Elena Višnar Malinovská. She is the head of the Climate Adaptation Unit at the Director General for Climate Action in the European Commission in Brussels, and she's joining us today directly from Brussels. We have Cuffe, a Green Party member of the European Parliament for Dublin, joining us today directly live as well. And we have Curtin, the Dublin Development Officer of the NGO Clean Coasts. Welcome to you all, and I'm most happy that you're joining us. I'd like to remind participants to submit your questions by email, because our guests will make a short initial presentation, after which we'll open up to Q&A with yourselves. Let me introduce Elena Višnar Malinovská, currently head of the Climate Adaptation Unit in DG Climate Action in the Commission, has worked for many years in the European Commission in different positions, dealing amongst others with environment, energy, mobility, and climate policies. I understand she's also an enthusiastic cyclist and even a scout leader in her free time. Elena, may I hand over to you?
Thank you very much, Andy. Very happy to be here. Good morning to Ireland. Next. Climate change is a reality, but it's actually also an option, because if we do not act, we will end up with figures that are popping at us from newspapers, be it about premature deaths due to air pollution, due to heat waves, or be it annual losses in higher temperatures, or the food price hikes, or again, news about flooding. And next, this becomes very individual and coming really to us as people, either as personal harm risks, health risk, welfare effects, or we see our quality of life affected. Let me share with you a small story. I am a Czechoslovak, and forests are part of my identity. I see the forests of my childhood dying because of climate change, because of drought, because of bark beetle or winds. Bark beetle or winds were with the forest always, but then came the climate change. And I see the whole landscape changes, and it affects me very much. Next, but there is a hope that is coming, because we see increasingly people realizing what it means, and 93% of citizens in Europe see that climate change is a very serious problem. Particularly important is that they also agree with the vision that has been laid out in the Green Deal to go for the first climate neutral continent by 2050. The same share has taken in their life at least one climate action. And many of them actually agree with the support and public support to clean energies. This is very important now that the recovery funds will hit the ground and they need to be allocated to green transition. And out of it, next, was born the Climate Pact as a new way of working with people, engaging with citizens, and bringing everyone who wants to be there to take action in their daily life and take it as an opportunity, not as a constraint, and everyone willing to contribute. Next. So what is it? This is about, first, we need to start learning about climate change, being aware of what it means and developing, scaling up the necessary solutions. This is also about connecting with others. And this is very important in the present circumstances, this as a collaborative project. And of course, we want to support the climate movement that is out there with different tools. Next. What's the method? Well, it's a very simple snowball effect and a circle, virtuous circle, because from talking about climate, you get to acting on climate and you accelerate the collective knowledge to again bring more science, more knowledge into our narratives and into our conversations. Next. And on the awareness side, we are recruiting ambassadors. These are people from all walks of life. It can be your neighbor, it can be your schoolmaster. These are people who have influence, and then they can talk about climate change and translating also scientifically sound information into options for action. This is also about bringing climate science more to the core of schools, and very importantly, it's about rebutting the climate myths that are out there and that are growing on social media. And of course, the online and offline get-togethers. Next. We have already some ambassadors, and you definitely will meet Caroline Corrigan at some point, our Irish ambassador who has signed up. Next. We have, for instance, in France, a grassroots activist who has removed the pavements in some neighborhoods in Paris. If you know Paris, that's really a brave move, and green them up. We have Martin from Norway, who is Olympian and waiting for Tokyo to happen. But in the meantime, he doesn't lose his time, and he's fishing out trash and creating crowdfunding based on that. So just a little example of few actions of our ambassadors. Next. Action should be science-based, of course, democratic, hands-on, transparent, locally grounded, and we're happy to support this action via the Knowledge Hub I've mentioned. It is important to bring finance to this action via philanthropies, but also the big funds we are managing. And for the next generation, it is important to have a say as to how the recovery funds will be managed. And of course, on action, everyone can take different pledges. We've heard about pledge from the Football Association, from music industry, from Scouts, from Google at our lunch event back in December. Next. This is not about just, knowing. It's also being part of the decision-making process. And we have seen very good examples in Finland, France, Netherlands, or Denmark. When you include youth or you include grassroots and citizens into your decision-making, it has an impact. It results in better policies. Next. We are teaming up with the Count Us In campaign, where it's important that you sign in for a simple action, and it aggregates it at collective level, showing that the drop in the ocean can be, at the end of the day, a tsunami that changes all. Next. Initial focus area, very importantly, are relevant to cities, be it green areas, mobility, buildings, or training for green jobs, because these are really the areas where we can leverage interest, but where most should happen in the coming years. Next. Of course, the pact as a collaborative project would need a sort of values, and these values will rest in science, in transparency, no greenwashing, very important, mostly for companies, ambition, urgency, diversity, inclusiveness, and of course we think that getting citizens behind these values is already job half done. Next. And who is targeted? Everybody. Very importantly, I spoke about media when it comes to climate myths and debunking them. Youth that actually created the need and demand for the Green Deal. We would never have it as a number one priority of the Commission. Public administrations, of course, citizens, the multipliers, influencers, but also academia that need to be brought from the bubbles, and they need to help us to understand what's happening around us and how we can actually deal with that. Next. And there will be many ways for citizens to take part, of course. You can sign up to become a Climate Pact ambassador, as Andy already mentioned. You can commit to a pledge. It can be your neighborhood pledge. You can co-create it with a neighborhood company or with a region. And of course, you can continue these climate conversations and debate on your own in citizen and multi-stakeholder dialogue. The important thing is to get and enlist as many people as possible. I've read somewhere that in the future we would need at least 1 billion activists to make a difference on climate action. Next. We had a very good launch event on 16th of December, where many joined, and we were already able to present the ambassadors you have seen. So far, 180. We have around 800 new applications. So this is an initiative that has a promise to grow. And just, leaving it on a little bit Valentine-ish slogan, let's protect what we love, because there's no action too small for the climate and for environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena, for that presentation. Very clear, very good slides. Let's pass on now to Ciarán Cuffe, who is the Green Party member of the European Parliament for Dublin. Ciarán also sits on the Energy and Transport Committees of the European Parliament and serves as the president of EU Forus, a European NGO that promotes the deployment of renewable energy sources and energy efficiency. Over to you, Ciarán.
Thanks, Andy. It's really good to be with you today. Elena, thank you for your reference to St. Valentine's Day. I was actually going to say today is St. Gubnut's Day. Now, Gubnut is a rather unfortunate name, but she was an amazing saint from Ballyvorney in County Cork, and she is the patron saint of bees and pollinators. And I think if we start with protecting biodiversity and bees, we're well on our way to saving the planet. And I think the importance of Gubnut is that start with what's around you, start with what is small, and then we can take on the much wider issues. And I think the European Climate Pact is all about this. It's looking around our neighborhood, seeing what we can do that has a practical impact, and then we can move on to those other things. And of course, we need the love of St. Valentine as well. And I never thought I'd be quoting saints in a speech in the European Parliament, but sometimes we do have to look to the past as we imagine our future. So thanks to the European movement, thanks to Ciarán for organising and to Andy for moderating, and it's great to be on a panel with so many other experts. Elena, great to see those statistics. And you know, the unfortunate thing is, I think we're all in theory in favor of taking action on climate change, but when it comes down to the actual practicalities, we're often a little bit reluctant to do so. Do we really have to leave our car at home? Do we really have to forego a 20 euro flight to southern Spain in a cold winter? These are the actual changes that I think we have to look at in our lives as we go on. It's not all bad news. And in fact, I think it's a good news story, but I think it will be difficult, and it is difficult often to bring the public with us on this journey. And I just want to give a little bit of perspective from where I sit as a member of the Greens EFA group in the European Parliament, and then talk about some practical things that we can do. So the Climate Pact is part of the European Commission's Green Deal agenda. And the Green Deal is this flagship answer to citizens' demands that we do something about climate breakdown. And it is all about ambition. We are living beyond our boundaries and the constraints of the planet. And in a sense, the European Green Deal gives us a roadmap for what can be achieved in the years ahead on the way to being climate neutral by 2050. You know, we've set some milestones along the way, 2020, 2030. Maybe we could borrow from the Chinese and have a 5-year plan, because I think if you know where you want to be in 5 years, it really concentrates the mind. And we do need to bring the public with us on this journey. And we can't just leave it all up to legislators, because we need action at a global level, European, national, regional, local, but ultimately it has to come from our community and from ourselves. And I think we can't neglect any one aspect of all of these different layers of the onion, if you could call it that. And I think the Climate Pact is all about engagement with the activism, the Fridays for Future, the March for the Climate that we've seen in recent years. And it's trying to bring together civil society, industry, and local communities. And this is crucial, because it's all very well for the European Union to act as a climate leader, but we do need to bring people with us. And what I see in the European Parliament is a certain enthusiasm for green issues, but as we move towards countries that are very reliant on coal and gas, and who really are on the early steps of economic development, there is a real reluctance to engage with the wider climate agenda. And that's why we need citizens to come with us on that. And I think the Climate Pact is a platform that can allow us to share ideas and build networks. So what can come out of this? I mean, I hope it'll push citizens into greater climate action. I think it'll concentrate the mind of communities, local authorities, and other agencies. In very practical terms, I mean, I can talk till I'm blue in the face about the renovation wave of renovating our buildings, because 38% of our emissions in Europe come from buildings. So if we super insulate our homes and other buildings, we're going to reduce our emissions. So the renovation wave is a really good way of doing this, and it can really tackle people living in energy poverty. So improving our homes is one thing. Changing the way we travel is another. We talk a lot about public transport and active travel. That means, Elena, when you get on your bike or when I walk somewhere, this is climate action in practice. Particularly thinking about the shorter journeys. Do we really need to drive, or can we choose public transport or walking or cycling? And this makes a real difference in our communities, and Europe can help us with this. So I mean, lots of people have got involved, thousands of responses to the public consultation. So I think we need to raise awareness. Applying on the pact on the website to become a climate ambassador is part of that. The online platform, I think, is brilliant. And you can register event just like this one, which can be advertised by the Commission. So I think this is a real attempt to bring people together. Sure, we need to be on the streets, we need to be marching. But climate action is about a lot more than just putting up a bird box in your garden. It's about changing the way we use energy, changing the way we travel, and moving in a greener direction. And I think in conclusion, it can be easy to be distracted. Omar Bradley said, you should set your course not by the lights of every passing ship, but by the sky, by the stars in the firmament above. And I think as we look at climate action, there's so much going on social media, in legislation, in political action. We need to focus on what we want to achieve, which is climate neutrality in less than 30 years. That's a really ambitious target. And I think we have to think about everything we do at work, in home, in how we get around. Are we focused on where we're going to, on the destination, rather than the distractions on that journey? So the Climate Pact is a really good opportunity for citizens, for groups to make their voices heard, to share ideas and best practices, and contribute on how the EU tackles climate change. And I'm looking forward to this journey. Thank you.
Ciarán, Cuffe, thank you very much for those wise words. I have to say, I'll quote from you when you said, we can't leave this to the legislators. It has to come ultimately from our local communities. I think that's a very good introduction to switch over to Richard Curtin, the Dublin Development Officer of Clean Coasts, because Richard deals with the coastal programs for Dublin, and his work involves engaging with communities and helping them to make a positive impact on the local environment. Richard, can I hand over to you?
Perfect. Thanks, Andy, and thanks to the other two speakers. So what I'm going to talk about, the work of Clean Coasts and how it kind of links into the Climate Pact. And where my work kind of differs from the other two speakers is we're very much kind of downstream solutions. So Clean Coasts is not involved in advocacy or not involved in kind of drafting policy or formal research. As Andy was saying, is we try to empower kind of communities and individuals to make that positive impact on their local environment. And the way kind of Clean Coasts works, it was first established in 2003 under an Interreg pilot project. And we tried to kind of use a wide suite of approaches to kind of access points for people can engage with the program. So the kind of backbone of the program is our Clean Coast groups, where we have around 1,200 groups that are dotted around the coast, and annually about 24,000 volunteers engage with the program. And with our kind of Clean Coast groups, right, they come from a wide variety of backgrounds. It's everything from individuals, families, to community groups, to kind of schools and universities. And when they kind of first established, what we tried to do is we tried to kind of work with them to kind of adopt an area of coastline. And it's interesting how they kind of develop from there. So they might initially start kind of undertaking beach cleans, but after they slowly kind of grow with confidence, they might start undertaking other projects. They'll start kind of engaging with the local authorities, you know, in relation to improving beach management practices or improving beach infrastructure. Or they might start kind of go from there. They might get involved in either other kind of campaigns or other kind of programs that are outside Clean Coast. So that's one thing that I really do love about my job, is seeing the confidence grow in these kind of groups as they kind of get more experienced and seeing that capacity build. We also have two other kind of other ways that we try to kind of engage with the public around the issues of marine litter and kind of like environmentalism and climate change. We have kind of two call to actions at the start of the bathing season in June, at the end of the bathing season in September. And what we find with these call to actions, it's a fantastic way of kind of like energizing and mobilizing people, because sometimes, like with environmentalism or climate action, it can be very, you know, individual actions that can be isolating. But when you have that kind of a call to action that kind of links the local to the national to the global, that's what the really way of invigorating and energizing volunteers. And as part of these kind of call to actions, we in September, for one of them is called the Big Beach Clean, and we link in with an international organization called Ocean Conservancy. And what they do is they coordinate global beach cleans around the world, but they also have a citizen science project, a part of it. And what they do is we collect marine litter data surveys. And what that is kind of used for is that's Ocean Conservancy correlated report. And each year we can see what the 10 most common items are appearing on our beaches globally. And as you can all, when we compare the Irish top 10 compared to the global top 10, there's always one item that doesn't appear, which is the plastic bag. And it's fantastic to see that like this citizen science project can like show how this legislative policy change is still making a massive positive impact on our local environment. And it's exciting to see that the Climate Pact has a citizen science element to it. So over the next 20, 30 years, we'll be able to record, citizens will be empowered to record the positive impacts of climate legislation is having on a local level. So there's other elements, as I was saying earlier on, there's different access points as well. So sometimes people don't have the capacity to get involved and to like undertake, involved with clean coast groups, or, their time would be limited. So we have micro volunteerism campaign called the 2-minute beach clean and 2-minute street clean. And this is just a very quick way. People even have 2 minutes on when they're next time they're on the beach, just to undertake a quick clean up and kind of like take a picture and upload on social media. And like this has a kind of like an amplifier effect as well. And obviously it goes from there. So it just having those kind of wide variety of access points really does help. And that's what's something that I think is really positive about the Climate Pact. And we do a number of kind of behavioural change campaigns. One called 2-minute beach, one called the Think Before You Flush campaign, and the other one called Break Up with Plastic. And this is try to kind of like, at a very individual level, what can people do? So how can they reduce their plastic consumption, but also how can they like tackle the issues of sewage related litter? So Clean Coast work is not just about kind of like actions, it's also trying to kind of celebrate the coast as well. So we run an initiative called our competition called Love Your Coast competition. It's a photography competition, and it's very much about showcasing, Ireland has some of the most spectacular coastline in the world, and the way we see it, it's about celebrating that. And our volunteers kind of keep saying it, like, and our ethos is, if you love it, you'll protect it. So it's kind of like getting that positive kind of image of Ireland as well, that it also empowers people. So when we link this into the kind of like the pact, I know Elena briefly touched about the pact values. Like when I first read up about it, one thing that really kind of struck me about it was like, it talks about, the science, responsibility and commitment, and the need for kind of like concrete science, evidence-based solutions. And it's definitely, I've noticed in the last couple of years, like environmentalism is very much in the zeitgeist, and climate change as well. But we have to be very, very careful about false solutions. Like, you see lots of kind of social media trends and kind of like certain solutions that are being put out as like to tackle like in marine litter and stuff like that, or, how to do behavioral change. And it's sometimes these kind of like solutions that are put forward end up doing more harm than good. They'll also have like unintended consequences. The pact also talks about, transparency and encouraging participants to kind of like share relevant information. I see that like in our own work in Clean Coast groups, when different groups kind of link up across Ireland, and how that knowledge share can really kind of have an add benefit to everyone's work in that. So it's exciting to see that. Now, obviously, there'll be some aspects, commercial, information that won't be shared, but like this kind of transition over the next 20, 30 years has to be as open source as possible. And it talks about, the no greenwashing again. And it's so interesting. Like I've noticed in the last couple of years, like I've been involved in this kind of sector for about a decade, and the appetite, for greenwashing is zero now by the public. And it's great to see that like the pact is going to put in, put in policies in place that it can't be used for that particular approach. And it also talks about, one of the other values is talks about, ambition and urgency, and, to aspire to transformative change. And, there is a massive need to kind of increase our kind of like climate literacy. But I think from my personal perspective, I also see there's a lack of understanding of what is actually required. Sometimes people believe that like, climate action, to achieve it and to hit our targets might be a couple of, put up a couple of wind farms and an electric car, but it is societal change. And it is important over the next, 10, 20, 30 years that we kind of ratchet up our messaging and the urgency. But it's a fine balance. Like we can't disempower people as well, So and also the action tailored to a local context. Like I know from my own work in Clean Coast, like some of the kind of projects that I would work on, or some of the kind of proposals that might work in a local context in Dublin, but when we try to transpose it to the West Coast in Clare, it would need tweaks and alterations. And, you know, it kind of reminds me of that John Millard Keynes quote, you know, it's easier to ship recipes than cakes and biscuits. And this is what we're going to be doing with this climate pact and with this transition, is we're going to be shipping solutions all across the globe and all across the continent. But like what makes probably the most delicious solution is when you kind of put a local twist on it and you add some local ingredients. And that's what the climate action is. That's how we're going to have to empower people, you know, in like getting those local solutions put forward. And that kind of is really empowering to people. And, you know, when local people see that climate action isn't this some distant thing, they see it at a local level, then it has that positive spin-off effects from there. And it is important, it also like a crucial kind of value as well. It talks about, you know, diversity and inclusiveness. You know, in an Irish context, like environmental is still very much considered kind of middle class, or, you know, same with kind of climate action and that. And we have to kind of empower people to, you know, or, you know, we have to find out what voices aren't being heard at the table, you know, like, and diversity, inclusiveness can't be tokenism. Like we can see quite often now, like just transition and climate justice, these are words that are quite used quite often these days, but sometimes there's not very much substance behind them. So when we talk about diversity inclusiveness, we have to kind of facilitate it as much as possible. And, you know, building that capacity is going to be so important. So in closing, like there is no vaccine, there's no silver bullet to the like complex the complex issue of climate change, you know. But one thing that I see with the Climate Pact it's a way of empowering people. And once people are empowered, they move away from climate despair. And when you couple that with the kind of top-down approach from the Commission that is going to like ensure that all sectors will play their part, like that's what we're going to achieve, the radical kind of monumental action that is required. So I look forward to see how this Climate Pact develops over the next number of years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard, for your opening remarks. And thank you to all three of you for inspiring us so much from your point of view and where you are working to talk about the Climate Pact. Ladies and gentlemen, please keep on sending your questions. I think at the bottom of the screen, you can see the email address, events@europeanmovement.ie. Richard, you've inspired me to ask actually the first question, because when you were describing, you know, the tweaks that are necessary when you transpose some of your activities from Dublin to Clare and, you know, need to adjust, I was wondering in that respect, and, you know, a question for all three of you, you know, what are the main obstacles to making the Climate Pact a success, both, you know, at the EU level and in Ireland? Ciarán, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, I can see political opposition in Europe. When I go down the rabbit hole of the details of legislation and trialogues and negotiation, the kind of ambition that we've seen in the headline statements from the Commission is often lacking when it comes down to the detail of where we spend money and what we do. For instance, the Connecting Europe facility is a big chunk of 30 billion for transport, digital, energy issues. But we've succeeded in getting almost 40% of that put into climate action. But that means that 60% of it is not going towards climate action. And that's the reality that we encounter every day. That, as I kind of hinted at earlier, people are often in favor in theory of climate action, but when it comes down to pipelines, gas projects, actual infrastructure that will continue to cause climate challenges in the years ahead, they're still being funded. So there are very practical issues. I mean, at a technical level, it is a huge challenge to move our energy systems towards away from fossil fuels is really difficult, and particularly in those countries that are hugely reliant on coal and gas. But I don't think that should thwart our ambition. And I think we need to move much more quickly, as the Fridays for Future people tell us. But the lobbyists are hard at work. And that was one of the things that really surprised me in the European Parliament, well, pre-pandemic, that the lobbyists were literally in the corridors, in the meeting rooms, pushing their point across. And I do find there's a dark side to how Europe operates in that regard. So, look, I hope I've touched on your question. And I guess what I just want to underpin is the difficulty in moving away from the status quo. Anything that is new, anything that is different is hugely challenging to wrestle with and move on with, whether it's in agriculture, in construction, in energy, in transport. The status quo is hard to shift. Thank
you very much, Ciarán. Elena, if we look at that level of the corridors of power in Brussels, where do you see the obstacles to making the Climate Pact a success?
We are not in the same corridors, Ciarán, because the lobbies can get to me only if they are on the register, and we produce minutes of talks with them that are accessible under request for access to documents. So we're quite controlled. But I think it was very well said also, the sort of mindset that's really something which will be hard to move, and actually Richard pushed it. It's not that much climate denialists that should be our main worry. It's more the climate despairers who say, okay, I admit it happens, but I can't do much about it. So I do believe that the mindset shift will be important. But you don't need. I work with scouts, and you don't need the 50% to do a snowball effect. You need just few of them, and suddenly you don't know what happens. It just moves. It changes. So I'm really a mental positivist on this side. You need to get really to the local level, and this goes only also with multilingualism. We are on an Irish event, of course we speak English, but we need people to talk the language of the local people understanding, and that's why you need to empower these local patriots, as I call them. I know it may have now a negative stint, but I believe in it, and I see it in the just transition, Richard. It's making difference. I have seen amazing projects, for instance, from Slovenia in the mercury mining region, Idrija, where the youth coming from this region, so kids of the former miners, took the affairs into their hands, and they are changing the course of the future. We have a lot of countries in Europe also that are not used to very inclusive decision making. Let's face it. I mean, I come from a country where I lived 30 years in communism. There have been changes, and it's still not a first reflex of the public administration to consult widely the public on action. We see it with the recovery plans. They are sent as a top secret to Brussels, and then suddenly they are leaked, and you get then complaints from countries to say this is important, this is not good enough. Finally, a point to Ciarán, I think we are moving now on the budget in the positive sense that it's not the 40% for climate and the 60% destroying it, but we have established this green oath principle, which is do no significant harm, and I can tell you we are trying to put a flesh on the bones of this principle. What it means exactly, that we don't undermine the credibility of some investment by worse investments. Of course, here the difficulty of the future budget is a lot is to be designed in member states, and the institutions are here to hold them accountable and to make the plans according to a high standard. So that's what I feel. It's a major challenge to then make sure that the future planning, and by the way, Ciarán, I think planning is an ancient art. I wouldn't place it with China. I think, it's really something we should always have as a sort of forward-looking, technique. And so I do hope we will be able to get into really strong recovery priorities, so that the climate neutrality will start showing already in the next 10 to 20 years.
I might just intervene, Elena. I'm trained as an urban planner, so planning is in my nature, and I recognize that it's not just a Chinese speciality. The ancient Greeks were pretty good at planning as well. And may I just say one other point? The register of lobbyists, it's fantastic that you as a commission official, only the lobbyists who are on the register can get to you. In the parliament, it's not the case. In my own political group, we register every meeting with the lobbyist. But in many of the other larger political groups, they don't require their MEPs to register lobbying meetings, unfortunately. So there is a challenge there.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we move on to the next question, I wanted to bring this question back to Richard, because you inspired the question. How do we, tackle the main obstacles to the Climate Pact, but then at the local level?
Yeah, definitely. There's one thing that I find from my own work in development is the strategic importance of a cup of tea, and that's how you need to kind of bring it down, is to a local level. And for the Climate Pact to work, especially in an Irish context, a lot of people would view the EU as something in Brussels and stuff like that. What possibly thing that could be done is try to kind of have not just ambassadors, but people supporting ambassadors, like paid staff at a local level, trying to support these projects, because that's the way, in Clean Coast, we support over 24,000 volunteers with staff of 12, and it's quite busy work. And, sometimes they just need to talk through how their actions and stuff like that. And it's important that, it's not just pushed online to a website, because there's also there's digital divide and there's digital literacy aspects to it. So having that local support would really, really kind of help it be implemented. There's also another thing in relation to it is, I know I mentioned earlier, is that everyone's playing their part. It's all sectors, because I find sometimes environmentalism at a local level, people will always point to fingers. Well, look, that sector's not doing this, or aviation is not doing that. So when the Climate Pact is an initiative, once people can see that all sectors are playing their part, that's how people will be more motivated to kind of enact. And yes, so kind of it will be, I think resources will play a big part in it, is how I would feel.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. Let's move on to a next question, which is maybe a little bit linked to this, because somebody's asking whether, to give priority to the Climate Pact, is that something that is supported by all the MEPs in the European Parliament, or is it just something that's a focus for the Greens? I mean, are we just paying lip service to Climate Pact, or is it really something to which the institutions of the EU and the member states are committed? Elena, can I start with you?
I think we just started. You need also to take the Climate Pact as an initiative that just started. Although I must say, the whole last year we tried to make it happen. We had a lot of co-creation, co-design via Zoom, and actually I must say, thanks to COVID, we have really made the technique of creating the initiative very compatible with the purpose. We do speak with a lot of institutions. There is huge interest. I think most of the interest came from the consultative committees where, you know, the locals sit, typically Committee of Regions and Economic and Social Committee, because of course they represent trade unions or mayors. We do have a positive feedback from also some parliamentarians, but of course there was still no resolution or you know, anything major. But for instance, I have with a group of parliamentarians, we have received a petition from Parents for Future back in November when they were cycling from I think Dortmund, or they were cycling to Brussels to give us the petition at the occasion of the anniversary of Paris Agreement. So you see, but it's more based on individual, you know, initiative. And of course, I maybe suggest Ciarán promotes any sort of more action in the Parliament. We know also the Parliament sweet spots when it comes to green issues. I think the travel to Strasbourg being the most known. And when it comes to the council, we had already discussions with the council, with member states. We reached out to national parliaments. So we are trying to get it into a public awareness that such an initiative, that such a people collaborative project exists, and they can spread the word, they can be part of it, they can get a script, but this is really not just, you know, bringing people back to the institutions. This is more to, you know, enlisting people and going on the own. That's the idea.
Yeah. Thank you, Elena. Ciarán, are you a lone voice in the Parliament for the Green Party making this a priority?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it really depends on the kind of resolution and the kind of action. So on broad green principles, there's a strong majority in the Parliament. You may remember that the Parliament sought a more ambitious target for climate action, that a majority agreed to a 60% reduction in emissions by 2030. So the Parliament was ahead of the European Council and I think the European Commission in some respects. We did have, I think, a resolution on the European Climate Pact back in January. Was agreed. I think there was strong support for that, but maybe we should do area. What I find interesting, when I get a little bit frustrated with the level of ambition, people say, look, this was unthinkable 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And I know from having involved in
Ciarán, I think there's
positive I think I'm back there now, am I?
Yes, you were briefly, the sound went. I'm afraid, Ciarán, that your sound is breaking up.
What I think is quite interesting is that many of the other institutions, bank and other pan-European institutions, are talking about sustainability. They're talking about investment in climate solutions. And I didn't see that a few years ago.
Okay, thank you very much, Ciarán. And sorry for the technical difficulties. You were breaking up briefly, but I hope it was just me that couldn't fully hear you. We have a question here from Cuffe, who's asking, Elena mentioned that it's not the climate deniers that are the issue, but do we think that the problem is a lack of action that maybe stems partly from the fact that people don't see climate change as a genuine threat yet, or a personal threat? Richard?
Yeah, like it is climate change. I think it depends on where they're based. Like if you're on the coast of Ireland, or if you're in like parts of Fingal with coastal erosion, or parts of Cork, climate change is very much to the forefront of your mind. So I do think, like, especially I'm originally from the Midlands, and we have lots of issues of flooding in relation to that as well along the Shannon. So more and more people are aware of it, but as it's kind of like sometimes people are slow to make the connection. They don't connect up the dots. Like even in like in an Irish context, you know, I would be a big sea swimmer, and it's after getting quite popular over the last couple of years. But it's also, we have a big issue with kind of water quality. But some of the result of this water quality issues has been increase in rainfall. So it's kind of like interesting how these kind of climate issues are affecting other aspects of lives. And then, but then again, like people are kind of slow to kind of make those connections. So it's challenging, like, because we're not trained, you know, society is in, you know, election cycles, or it's in the short term, or that's the kind of the current model we're in. And as Ciarán was saying about the planning aspect to it, you know, we have to be, we don't think of, we only think of the next week or the next month. And it's going to be, you know, a challenge to kind of switch that mindset. And that would probably possibly a way of kind of engaging people of the threats of climate change.
Yes. Elena, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, many. I very much agree with what was said, and I think here we really need to work on awareness and educating people. There was a good article in The Guardian, you know, a few months back, where the author said, we are ashamed if we don't know Shakespeare, but we are almost proud of knowing nothing about water or carbon cycles. And that's very, very much true. You know, we have forgotten to observe the nature, because, you know, wherever you are, you just need to observe the trend around you, you know, the spaces, how it changes, the birds you don't see, you know, 20 years ago, we had a lot of sparrows in cities, you know, not anymore the case, and things like that. You just accumulate a certain memory, and of course it needs to be linked to the scientific research and combined. But definitely, I think that's the case, because I must say everyone must be somehow touched today, and it's also about communicating. My husband works on the COVID, you know, response, and he was, you know, asking me very innocently last year, like, how come you don't count, you know, climate deaths? You know, these sort of heat waves that happen, you know, every year in certain cities and parts, the premature deaths, you know, due to air quality. I mean, it's how come it doesn't come on the account of the ecological degradation and the climate emergency? But that's how it is.
Ciarán, I guess you're confronted with this sort of issues as well. I mean, do we first have to be threatened personally before we take action?
Maybe. I think it really varies from community to community, from different age groups. And I guess in the world of politics, you try very hard to communicate using different approaches with different groups of people, and there's no perfect way of installing in people a realization that they need to take action quickly. I do know, though, that, you know, I've been a city councillor in Dublin's inner city on several occasions, and you need to talk about the environment and the threats in different ways. People understand air quality. They understand that their children are suffering from asthma, and that's a really powerful way to get people to understand that the natural environment is changing. In the last few years, there's been an explosion of interest in community gardens. Going back to St. Gubnut, bees are a lovely way of communicating with everyone. But we've realized that some things don't work. You know, the polar bear on the block of ice looking sad, it doesn't really get to people anymore. I think you do have to work within the environment that people are familiar with, how they travel to the shops, the noise from urban traffic. Noise is a big issue to communicate, to get people to understand. So it really does vary. And obviously, we haven't found the perfect way of installing in people the real imperative for action right now. And I go back to that thing I said earlier, that people know we have to do something, but when it comes down to, well, what do I actually do? They may be reluctant. And I did say that we can't we can't put all of the action onto the legislators, but that doesn't let myself and other legislators off the hook. We have to move more. We have to move more quickly, but we also need to bring people with us. And if we can work at a community level, work at the levels that Richard and others are looking at, it's hugely important, because that does get to people when they see rubbish on a beach or when they see a stream that's polluted.
Thank you very much, Ciarán. I'd like to move on with a few questions we're getting in to a more sort of global level, because of course climate change needs a global response. And one of our participants is asking, how do we engage with global partners? How can we ensure that we're not just setting goals for us within the EU, but do we need to engage with maybe a climate pact at the global level? Elena.
We are engaging very actively. I think outside also the multilateral settings of the Paris agreements, because we are aware that it is an important agreement, but it has also its limits. On a bilateral basis, we have a lot of cities networks, like the Global Covenant of Mayors, that really drives this agenda among cities in different regions, be it in the US, Latin America, and we are trying also to expand more in Asia. So that is happening. You have also under the United Nations framework on climate change, you have this part of non-state actors action, because there is this understanding of, how much it matters. For instance, in 2016, 40% of emissions were represented actually by regions or cities. So that's not a part we can ignore. And we try to link, and the Count Us In I showed is actually a global campaign. This is about the end is to have 1 billion actions recorded on this aggregator. So it's really creating this sort of snowball effect. But again, it shouldn't be just about campaigns, one-off campaigns, but it must be a continuous effort. And this is where the Climate Pact will be tested. So it's not like when you adopt a legislation and you have it negotiated and you wait then a few years until it is implemented, and then you go to infringements because it didn't happen. Here it's keeping people interested on a continuous basis, doing it and becoming part of you, becoming part of your identity, that at the end of the day, you will not, ask yourself, oh, I would prefer to go for 20 euro to Barcelona over the weekend, but you really do these sort of ethical choices in you, very naturally.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Ciarán, I see you nodding. Would you like to come in?
Yeah. Yeah, the 20 euro fare. I love trains, and I travel around Europe a lot on trains, from Stockholm to Vienna and back to Brussels a year ago, actually. And I'm always evangelizing slow travel. The journey should be as important as the destination. But looking at the global issue, I think the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, are hugely important. And one of them is climate. And it seems that they have got a lot of traction within organizations. People are trying to align the work they do with the SDGs, which I think is a really positive development. So I think we need to reach out and look at global agreements and global frameworks, and maybe work with them as much as trying to impose our own pact on them. So we need to make good partnerships with other organizations and other frameworks that can help us deliver. I mean, look at the work that Richard is doing. It doesn't matter if it's the Climate Pact, the SDGs, the Tidy Towns competition, it's happening. And we can tick the box that it's positive using lots of different frameworks, and that can only be seen as a positive step.
Thank you, Ciarán. Richard, you're a local organization, Clean Coasts, and you know, at the international level, and I think Elena just mentioned it, there's also an inclusion of NGOs and community organizations in those international discussions. Like, for instance, we have a question about the COP26 being organized later on this year in Glasgow. I mean, we can talk about the EU's approach, but what would your approach be to such an international forum?
Well, from perspective of Clean Coasts or perspective of a probably environmental campaigner, I do know there's big mobilization in Irish context to kind of like raise awareness around the COP, and it is important that as much civil society kind of engages with it, because it's having our voices at the table. You know, I was at COP21 in Paris, and it was the energy was just absolutely fantastic, and it was also inspiring because you meet people from all over the world, and you have those conversations, you make those connections, and it stops becoming a small local issue. It becomes a global issue, and it's from those relationships from COP21 have kind of built with myself over the last couple of years. So it is going to be critical. Like this, Glasgow is going to be such a critical time, and it's important that we get a very strong agreement going forward. But engaging citizens, engaging the public, to kind of have those conversations, what actually climate change means, what kind of climate action means, is going to be critical. And just to talk about, just briefly, what Ciarán touched about the SDGs, we see that as a fantastic way as kind of linking in climate action, and as kind of individuals or companies can actually, integrate these particular goals, and it kind of keeps people aware of them. It's not just about climate action, it's also about life below water, and we're constantly continuously trying to connect people to nature. Nature's just not out there. It's part of our everyday lives. It provides us with oxygen, with food. It's our life support system, and getting people aware of that. And when we do kind of our work through kind of Clean Coasts and beach cleans, like, we can see the global damage that is happening. We find litter items from all over the globe, and that's what we keep trying to kind of link in when we work with kind of like international people in Dublin context. We always try to keep hammer home the message: you're not just making a local impact, but you're also making a global impact. And that's what I think is going to be so important with negotiations and with climate action, is you keep linking the local, global, and national.
Okay, thank you, Ciarán. I think COP26 in Glasgow will be high on your agenda as well.
Yeah, it will. I think I've been to 3 COPs at this stage. I think they are hugely important. Obviously, at a technical level, the meetings before the COP are hugely important, that happen every few months on the run-in to the COP. I do sense, and I guess I'm long enough in environmental politics, you get a wave about once a decade. I think this wave seems different because I think people are seeing the impact of climate change around the world, particularly over the last year.
I think we're losing you, Ciarán.
Is it? Yeah, I'm not sure what put it there, but I think there is a real momentum running, and I think it will be a motivation to take more ambition.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ciarán. Elena, I guess you are preparing for COP26. I mean, it's part of your work, isn't it?
Well, it is. Definitely. I've been to 2 COPs. I think it is always an interesting gathering, yet it is still a bubble. It's still a bubble of converted climate, activists. but we are definitely preparing also to do a little bit more on climate pact, to communicate it to international partners, and to show hopefully some achievements, some results based on the first year, because we really need to make the initiative to grow and not to fall flat, let's say. But yeah, what I see sometimes in these COPs is there is a little bit of disconnect between the technical negotiations, world, and what happens then on the non-state part agenda, on the meetings, the business fair that you see there, etc. That's quite interesting to see how the second part has grown in since Paris, since Copenhagen, probably more in size.
Okay, thanks very much. I have a few very specific questions that maybe I can place with you. And we have a question from I've lost my questions. Sorry for that. There we are. A question from Sharon about machinery-based beach cleaning equipment to be used by local authorities. Richard, are you aware of any sort of EU document that gives best practice in that respect?
So there is, basically, when you beaches are very sensitive ecosystems. So when you kind of bring heavy machinery onto it, like we have this vision of what a beach should look like, and that's not true to reality. Like they're kind of manicured within an inch of their lives of certain European countries in the Mediterranean. They're a live ecosystem. We got beach rack, and it's very, very important for the wildlife, in the marine wildlife. So our approach would be to it is try to has a sensitive approach as possible. So use manual beach cleaning staff. We would possibly discourage, if at all possible, the use of machinery, because generally it's going to cause more damage in the long run. But then it's a balancing situation. So in some local authorities or some areas, they're quite busy, and there are a lot of traffic and stuff like that, and there's large quantities of rubbish, and they mightn't have the capacity to kind of undertake manual beach cleans, so machinery might be used in that situation. So it's like everything with environmentalism. It's a balance act between societal budgets and the environment.
Okay, thank you very much. We also have a very specific question to Ireland, because as Ireland moves away from using peat, and the closure of some power stations, it seems that slowly the supply of peat briquettes is drying up, and somehow they're being now imported from other European member states. So one of our participants is asking, is there a need for more cohesion between member states to prevent this? Elena.
Well, I believe peat is like coal, so it is also part of these just transition. But I hope, Richard, it's not just an empty term. It is really about looking at the regions in a more holistic way, seeing what are the opportunities for transformation. And I can tell you, I accompany very closely one of the regions in my country, in Slovakia, to see, what is the possible action plan, and we looked very much at demography, the opportunities, the other economies in the region, and there is the whole planning going on with a possibility to set projects. And indeed, Just Transition Fund is again part of the cohesion policy family that is based on solidarity. So definitely I am sure these peat peat exploiting and peat burning, regions as high emission region are eligible under the Just Transition Fund mechanism, and can go through these, I would say, maybe painful but very helpful, transformative and consultative process to line a different future.
Okay, thank you very much, Elena. Ciarán, I'm happy you were able to reconnect with us. Thank you for all your efforts. There's a specific question for you that I have from Garrett, but it might be more destined also for your colleagues in the Oireachtas. What, if any, are the plans in place to electrify Ireland's public transport network?
Yeah, good question. Sorry about the Wi-Fi. There's too many students in the house online at the same time. In terms of electrification, I've had several meetings with industry representatives here in Dublin, and they would contend that pretty much anything within the M50 can be electrified in the transport arena, even heavy trucks for deliveries. So, and I think we've seen a lot of developments in terms of battery performance, even over the last 12 months. What can we electrify? Well, we are electrifying the rail to the west of Dublin, and I understand that is underway. The DART is already electrified, as are our trams. Our buses, we're just buying hybrids. I think we have to bite the bullet and go to fully electric buses. If Shenzhen can do it, I think Dublin can. I know there's lots of technical problems, and you know, I'm a bit of a bus spotter. I've gone to Bus World, the big industry convention in Brussels, and I know, you know, to get double-decker buses where you drive on the opposite side to the continent, there's a very limited supply of these, so there are technical challenges. But I think over the next 2 years we'll see fully electric buses in numbers on the streets of Dublin. That's a big step forward. And then I think in terms of electric cars, the last 2 years have been extraordinary around Europe. Norway, obviously, but in the Netherlands as well. And I think we'll see a big shift to electric vehicles. I'd love to see an end date for the internal combustion engine, but there's political resistance to that. Look, I've brought it up with Commissioner Timmermans. We know this has to happen. We'd like to see it happen sooner. But again, the car industry is somewhat reluctant to make the shift. I think the best way to do this is to talk about air quality, because people understand the threat to their health from poor air, even if they don't realize that we have to phase out the diesel and petrol cars. So I think there is still a lot of political activity to be taken. And in the meantime, the rollout of active travel, not just in Dublin, of walking and cycling, it's happening in Brussels, it's happening elsewhere in Europe. And that's an extraordinary low-hanging fruit to help people get around with less damage to the planet.
Thank you, Ciarán. Ladies and gentlemen, we're slowly coming towards the end of our discussion today. I'd like to put one more question to our panelists that has been sent in by Zoe. How do we reach beyond those that already understand the issues of climate change? Elena.
I think it is mostly to recruit people who may be the influencers or multipliers of these people, often kids. Teenagers who can influence the parents, but really also to avoid the divide I see coming up between city and rural people, really having representations from different parts. And I see the tide is changing also in agriculture. My husband is Slovene, and what I see as a trend is the agroecology, so you can communicate climate through, sustainable practices and so on. And final point, we have in our, let's say, Climate Pact community now also music, sports, museums. So this is really a huge community that hopefully will, talk to the ones that do not think climate action today.
Thank you, Elena. Over to you, Richard. How do we reach beyond those that understand?
Yeah, so this is the kind of, it's like, I'd say it's speaking their language, something that Elena said as well. Like, you don't talk to farmers possibly about climate action. You might talk to them how can they improve their soil and how that kind of benefits them, or even in relation to kind of water quality. So it's trying to kind of bring the conversations to their level. Like, what are their needs, or what are their issues? what kind of solutions kind of like have an add benefit in their life, and that's kind of a way of kind of, you know, getting people's attention in that. And it's quite interesting. Just in the last speaker talked about kind of like, you know, sorry, the last question was in relation to the peatlands. I'm from Offaly myself originally, and I can see it at a very close level of the impact of the transition of away from peat. But it is, I spoke earlier about it, it's so important that kind of top-down level, there's like, people don't see environmentalism and climate action as like just a carrot or just a stick the whole time. They need to see the carrots as well as the sticks. So when we see things like, you know, Ireland shutting away peat, it is important that it's possibly discouraged across the EU as well. So we're not, as I said, there's people not saying that, oh, we're importing it from another region. And we can see the same that kind of developing in the agriculture sector in Ireland as well, where like people are saying, well, look, if we have to implement X, Y, and Z, and it's been imported from another country, you know, that's, people would say, well, this is not fair from that perspective. So it is quite important that, you know, our climate policies, you know, our trade policies are very much interlinked, and it's great to see that the EU are kind of moving in that process going forward. So back to your original question, yes, it's about kind of like speaking the language what people, you know, need. So like if it's in business, so how can people make money? You know, if it's how can they reduce their costs in relation to climate action and that. So it's a wide variety of approaches, as Ciarán from his experience said, from a politician perspective.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. Ciarán, over to you, the final question.
Yeah, it's all the issues, Elena, working with children. Richard, very interesting, listening to the concerns that people have. People are worried about change in agriculture particularly. So I think we have to say, look, what's your worry? What can we do? And, you know, farmers know the land. They want to conserve the land. And conversations I've had where farmers say, look, the rain is different now. It's coming in downpours. I put down the fertilizer and it's just washed away into the stream. So that kind of getting to the heart of people's fears is hugely important. And then, of course, at a European Union level, the Just Transition Fund is all about providing the training and the money to transition away from fossil fuels. We need to make sure that that continues to be rolled out.
Thank you very much, Ciarán, and thank you to all three of you for your interventions and wise thoughts today. It's much appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the end of our event, and I'd like to thank Elena Višnar Malinovská from the European Commission in Brussels, Ciarán Cuffe, MEP for the Green Party, and Richard Curtin of Clean Coasts for sharing their time and thoughts with us today. I also like to thank the European Movement in Ireland for their work together with us at the European Commission representation in realizing this event. I'd like to encourage those that were participating today to consider becoming an EU climate ambassador. You can find all the details on the European Commission's website. Now, finally, just two pieces of notice that are coming up, because the European Commission representation together with the European Movement are organizing another webinar in 2 weeks' time on the 23rd of February about the EU vaccine strategy. And we'll be sending out a notice with more details on that soon. And also the European Movement itself is organizing another event on the 17th of February with the ESB CEO, Pat O'Doherty, about the electric future for Ireland and Europe. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to conclude our event. Thank you very much for attending, and we hope to see you back again in another webinar with us soon. Thank you very much.